Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Michelle Hayward, and welcome to another episode of the series of talks called The Equity Pursuit. Today, we have another exciting conversation around equity in the workplace called Avoiding the Diversity Hire Trap. And you're like, wait, is that sort of like the parent trap, diversity? Like, what is this all about? So, here at Positive Hire, we focus on connecting Black, Indigenous, and Latinx women who are experienced scientists, engineers, and technology professionals to management roles. Sometimes that means recruiting and hiring them. And how do we work along with employers and people like Alison, who's our guest today, really staying out of the diversity hire trap? And so what do we mean when we say diversity hire? There's a positive and a negative connotation to that phrase. So when we think about diversity hire, sometimes people are referring to increase the diversity of their staff in their organization on a team. But you have to define what diversity is for your organization or for that team or department or division. And so it may not be the same for every organization or team or division, but you really need to define it for this your situation. But on the negative side of diversity hire, you want or organizations are looking to check off a box. Okay, we hired one Black person. We got that done. We hired a woman. We have that done. We hired a mom. Oh, wow. And so you really need to understand that that's generally not where you want to go, but being focused more on creating a culture. And we're going to talk about that some. And so I want to introduce our speaker who's able to join us. We have one who isn't able to join us. And so we circle back to her and we'll bring in some of her thoughts throughout this conversation as well. But joining me today is Alison Daley. Alison is the founder and CEO of Recruiting Innovation. Now you know why I have Alison here, right? She is a 15-year veteran of the recruitment industry, where she focused on the intersection of technology, workforce development, and reimagining recruitment models for the 21st century. She's the creator of the Tech Recruiter Certification Alignment Framework and executive director of the Ernestine McClendon Talent Grant. Alison is a pioneer in technology recruitment, and she's an international speaker, trainer, and of course, an entrepreneur. Alison, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Michelle. I think this is a really important conversation. Out there and share perspectives, I think we can start to move the needle in people's awareness or of changing their actions as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. I absolutely agree. So what we're going to do now is really get in and start off the conversation around the trap itself. Like what is, when you hear diversity hire, right? What comes to mind for you?
When I hear diversity hire, like in its classic sense, like you were outlining earlier, kind of makes me think of like almost like an energetic, like cotton candy hire. Like it's just super, it's just sort of like checking a box, like you said. Oh, we got our one Black person, or one person over 50, or one woman. Good. And it's like a transactional view, whereas like a fully integrated diversity hiring process isn't just about the hire part. It's like thinking about the whole entire candidate life cycle. How do we source? How do we attract? How do we qualify? How do we offer and negotiate? But then equally as important, how do we onboard and retain, right? Because to me, a diversity hire is you got them in the door and then you did nothing else to support them. And didn't do the work of first sort of auditing and assessing where are we as an organization, because when it's a cohesive approach, really recognize that a person is not diverse, teams are diverse, groups of people are diverse. And so in order for us as an organization to truly understand how to hire for diversity, we need to first take stock with what do we have now, right? And we can get into that in a little bit more detail. But when I hear diversity hire in its sort of simplistic version, it's very transactional. We did a thing and now we're done. Yay, yes.
Absolutely agree. And I love how you talked about the definition of diversity hire, like one person is not diversity and diverse. So the phrasing in itself is not correct. So definitely agree with you on that. I want to go into one of the traps that you brought up, which is the tokenization and it being transactional, and as well as that transaction we just hired, right? There's no plan, there's no strategy. How do we get companies to like swing over and really look at how do they switch? Like, what is something they should be doing from not just a recruiting standpoint to diversify their talent pipeline, but to really focus on the retention side?
I think
And
it's start at the very beginning. Okay, let me know. I know my internet, we have a storm coming through, so apologies if my screen keeps going off. But I think it's really important as leaders, talent leaders, hiring leaders, organization leaders, first just with where we are now, like with anything, right? Like before we can start, really we can dictate where we want to go, but first we have to start with where we are now. And that means that we need to do an audit. We need to audit what are our benefits? What do we offer? Like what kind of culture are we truly building? As well as then sort of auditing the teams that we have, because we need to sort of have a benchmark line where we're starting in order to measure our growth and if we're actually hitting our goals against that benchmark. And so, part of that process starts with realizing that the American workplace, and probably this is true for every other country, whoever your incumbent is, or the dominant social culture, but in the U.S., especially in tech, the dominant system is designed for and by white men of higher education, right? And so when you look at the job descriptions, the needs to have, all the nice to haves, everything's piled in there. When you look at the benefits, it's all kind of leaning, homogeneously towards supporting that one demographic. When you look at the internal perks and the culture and the way the office is set up, again, for people that don't necessarily represent everybody. And that's not to say anything negative about them. It's just we need to first recognize the system that we're operating in. And so part of that audit is then we look at every step of the candidate life cycle to see where are we potentially perpetuating bias. And just to make it easy for you, by default, just take the track that everything that you've done that's non-interrogated has bias in it, because we inherently are human beings and we have bias. And it is what it is. It doesn't mean we're bad people, but we have to know better in order to do better, as Morrison would say. But what we need to do is say, okay, well, how are these job descriptions written? Who are they written for? How is the interview process set up? How is the process, who's this process set up for? Let's look at our benefits. Who are the benefits set up for? And if you can do an audit and sort of think through like, okay, well, what are we missing? And as my colleague Mo Abdullah talks about with, building equitable structures, with every decision we make, we have to also ask before we make that decision, who are we potentially leaving out, or who are we potentially harming with this decision or with this action? And so to give you just something to food for thought, job descriptions tend to be, 500 words, like all these things that are equally weighted. And the data shows that men will apply to a job description if they meet 60% of the requirements. Women will only apply if they meet 100% of the requirements. So if you want more women, take away the nice to haves, take away all the extra fluff, just have 5 to 6 things that are the must haves, the outcomes required to do the job. And then voila, you'll have more women applying to your job, right? So that's kind of what I'm talking about with cohesive process. Interrogate literally everything that you are doing now, recognize who you're missing or maybe who you are inadvertently blocking from seeing themselves there, and then start to make the steps to making a more equitable structures for both the recruitment and the retention aspects of your business.
I absolutely love what you said. So much of what you said. So I want to dig into the audit part. And I think that's where a lot of organizations skip that. They automatically go, oh, I know who we need. And they aren't doing an audit of their entire recruitment process. And then how are you retaining the talent? I often ask or have asked questions. Usually I don't get a response is, who were the last people that, let's say you define who you're going to hire as diversity, like what are the traits or whatever you're looking for diversity in your organization that you want to bring into that talent pipeline. I said, for those people, how many have you previously had and why did they leave? And they may not respond, they may know. And what have you done or did you do to try to retain that talent? Because if you haven't figured out or determined or even tried to determine why they left, nor have you tried to make any changes in the organization, you're really not doing anything to retain the talent. It's just going to be not a rotating door. What's the door that goes around in a circle?
Yes,
and
merry-go-round.
It'll a revolving door. That's it. And so you really haven't.
Yes.
The true test of all of this is how can your organization retain diverse talent, however you define it. And if your goal is only to recruit, it is easier to do that for some. Maybe not. I don't know, because the other thing is we've tried, but we haven't been successful. And then we ask, what happens to you? You ask potential clients or others in discussions about diversity recruitment. What are some of the responses you often get, Alison?
On why they're not being more successful? Or
yes.
Well,
and I think we may be losing Alison. Let's see.
Oh, shoot. I see me. Is it not working?
Okay, now I can hear you clearly. You were breaking up for a second.
Okay, there. I'm so sorry. Yeah, IT, man, come on. These days, one of the two things that we often hear, as excuses, and let's just call them what they are. They're excuses. They're lazy. It's an indicator that they haven't really thought critically about it. But one of the things is constantly objections is that we're in a rush, right? Like, we need this job yesterday. And I would just like us as an industry in the recruiting space to just take the need for speed off the table, because let's interrogate this a little bit. By the time that there's enough workload to justify, yep, we're going to get a head count. Yep, here's a job description. Yep, we're going to activate recruiting for this role. Inherently, you needed it 2 weeks ago. So we all know it's a rush. So stop using the need for speed as an excuse, because that's all it is an excuse. And it's actually also this sort of rushing, this lack of speed is actually a cornerstone of white supremacy as well. If we keep everyone hurried and not able to slow down and think, then they can't in any way object or organize and sort of protest. So let's keep them busy and tired. So side note, take speed off. Okay, fine. Then let's take some space and say, all right, well, who do we have now? Coming back to the audit bit, right? Where it's sort of doing an audit of the team. So when I would be with a dev manager and new onto the team, I'd say, let's walk through everyone that you have. How many folks have CS degrees? And I'm more on the tech side, so take it with a grain of salt. Who has CS degrees? Who has bachelor's degrees? Who has boot camp degrees? Who's self-taught? What is sort of the makeup of the educational experience with the people? Now let's look at the gender numbers. Let's look at the racial numbers. Let's look at age demographics. How many people are under 30? How many people are over 40, right? Actually getting an audit and assessment of who you have will then inform to you, hey, that means and is everyone coming from B2B SaaS companies? Do you have anyone that's doing consumer product goods? Do you have anyone that's done media? really thinking, holistically about what diversity means. It's diversity of experience, socioeconomic upbringing, training, even cultural, right? Like, and then from there, you can determine, okay, we need more of this sort of representation to ensure that we have a holistic coverage on our team. Because just to bring it back to some data, like people with similar backgrounds, experiences, and skill sets have similar mental models. And so if everyone is looking in the same direction and everyone has the same 180-degree movement of their neck, well, guess what? You've got a whole other 180 degrees behind you that your competition is coming for, right? And so the fact of just having different people with different perspectives, forcing you to think more creatively and more determinedly about what you're building and how and for whom, you will inherently build better products that people want to use and inherently be more successful. So, slowing down in order to set up the proper structures. And then guess what? Once you have the structures set up, you can speed back up. I think it was Microsoft that did a study that they said, no, you know what? We are going to have a requirement for screened, to be interviewed, to be hired. And it took them about 90 days. They slowed down for about 90 days, but within 90 days, because they set everything up correctly, they were back to the same speed that they were from before. But it was because they slowed down to get the things set up in order to move faster. And so that would be my main thing to bring up is take speed and urgency off the table and do the work to set up your structures and then turn the faucet back on. You know what I'm saying? So you can have a lot of impact, but you have to be cohesively intentional about what you're doing and why.
Definitely slow down to speed up. I love that. I would say I definitely see that. And then when they do come, they're like, oh, well, when did you start the recruiting process? 4 months ago. So why are you here now? Like you want to do diversity recruitment on the back end, whatever that looks like for you. And it's not part of the process overall. And it's like, oh, well, can you send us? It's like, no. Like now they're at a disadvantage. You're trying to rush them to get on a call to with me, with you, with your team to do these interviews in a rush because you usually pre-selected or kind of know what you're looking for because you've had 4 months to look at candidates. And that is highly at a disadvantage and unfair for other candidates coming in, especially if, because too often we get the feedback, oh, well, we selected somebody else. It's like, I just interviewed 3 days ago, so you already knew. And we talk about these things, we being mostly Black women and Latinas, about what's going on in the space. And so then you're like, well, we aren't getting a lot of people apply because we've already told the stories about how you do your recruitment. And so we refuse to let others go through that same process. And so we're literally asking, has anybody heard of this company? Have you like, oh, it was horrible experience. You may not be in these spaces, but we're in these spaces sharing this information. And so you've made your recruiting process where you're trying to diversify your talent pipeline even more difficult because you decided to do diversity recruitment on the back end, and now it makes it even more difficult at any level because these groups are communications often from entry level to very senior people with 20 plus years of experience and it's across anything from marketing and help desk to actually software development. And so now everybody in all of these different aspects of an organization are talking about you and people are sharing their experience with your organization. So again, I agree with Alison that you need to slow down to speed up so that you're giving the same candidate experience to all candidates throughout this process. So I absolutely agree with you, Alison. I want to go to when we're looking at the hiring process, and that's another trap, right? It's the hiring process that's created by employers. What are we seeing as far as bringing in, like you said, you're looking at they're doing an audit and they're looking at the experience level, education level of people, of employees they currently have. How are employers then creating hiring processes that are also a trap? Like what else are they doing? And we may have lost Alison. Yeah. So what I would say when we look at another part of how employers set up a process, and this is real, it's very, very easy to fail at something. And you're like, Michelle, what do you mean? It's very easy to fail at a diet. It is very easy to fail a class. It takes absolutely no work. And what you may see is some organizations have hiring processes. They also have goals that they set so that they don't meet them and they prove a point in doing so. Or they have a hiring process that has been streamlined and is really good, but they don't have a process of onboarding that supports talent that's diverse in their organization, right? And so I want to talk about that hiring process where they actually set it up to fail candidates or specific candidates. And sometimes it's in different testing, or they don't have a standardized interviewing process. So candidates come in, and depending on how the interviewing panel or the hiring manager feels, they can switch up the interview questions, right? Too often we're finding out that talent is going through and being interviewed, and their interview experience is very different because they're asked different questions during the process. And so when we are looking at how do you create an equitable interviewing process, organizations like, well, our process is just fine, but it's not standardized. And so, Alison, as you're talking to employers, what are you seeing across the board or seeing that's not working, or what does work when it comes to the interviewing process?
Yes. The thing that I think that is basically the future of recruiting, and you're seeing it more and more, is a concept called outcomes-based hiring or skills-based hiring. And so my friend Anthony Lewis at Beacon Talent is the guy I go to for all things outcomes-based hiring. He's the best. He talks about outcomes-based hiring. It sort of takes away this sort of ephemeral, implicit expectations around the role and makes the role and the requirements more explicit. So the model with outcomes-based hiring is you take the mission of the business, right? What is our mission as a company? And then every role on the team has their own mini mission that feeds into the other mission. It's not just some abstract front-end engineer role. This role's mission rolls up into the bigger mission. And so you have the mission, you're like, okay, well then what are the outcomes that this role needs to be able to produce in order to make this its own mission successful? Okay, here are the outcomes. Well, for those outcomes, what are the skills, competencies, and behaviors that we need the right person to have in order to achieve these outcomes? And so then you outline very specifically, right? You can do pivot tables in Excel. You can, blah, 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 blah. What are the 3 to 5 things that you have to be able to do to be successful? And then guess what? Those things become the outcomes, skills, or behaviors. And those things actually become the scorecard for your interview process. It's not, hey, how long have you Java'd and would I have a beer with you, right? That's not objective. But the scorecard then becomes the evaluation rubric that then gets delegated to the different people in the team to make sure that they're asking the same questions to get the same measurement. And then cohesively, they're covering the 5 key outcomes this person needs to be able to achieve. And then that becomes the job description. So then you have this like fundamental rubric, the scorecard that informs what the job description looks like, that then informs what is being qualified and assessed in the interview process. And then guess what? The person gets hired. 90 days at their 90-day review, you pull out that scorecard again. Are you achieving the things that we had explicitly outlined as a performance, not a ephemeral, do we like you, and as a performance element? Are you delivering on these things? And if it's a yes, then you're doing a great job. And if not, that gives us an opportunity at an objective level to ask, is it the person that maybe we didn't assess them effectively? Is the mission of the role a little bit different than we expected? Is there something on our end that we need to correct, right? And so then it becomes this system that we can just get better at, right? And have a system to follow. So moving away again from sort of like pedigree and do I like you to can you do the job? And are we being fair in our evaluation of everybody to do the job? And so outcomes-based hiring, in my opinion, is what we need to be doing more of moving forward to actually be able to not only effectively and fairly assess the candidates, but then to be able to measure ourselves and our ability to determine what does the role need to do and who would be the right person to do it. Because right now, so much of hiring is just gut, right? And just like untrained interviewers just fumbling their way through awkwardly. And no wonder we have such a terrible time hiring and retaining talent of any type, but specifically talent of which the systems are not designed for and by them, right?
Absolutely. I like that approach. I think it is definitely a way to remove some of the bias in the process. It is very easy to hire someone and set them up for failure. It takes deliberate effort and work to set new employees or employees overall up for success. And utilizing that approach, at least in the first 90 days, can really, really help that.
Right.
I love connecting on different social media platforms and on LinkedIn specifically, seeing so many women from Black, Latinx, and Indigenous backgrounds, especially at the science, tech, and engineering, getting promotions. And my fear is, please don't let this be a glass cliff opportunity, right? Where they're set, everybody like, the glass ceiling. Well, the glass cliff is, you get higher, you get to that level, and they find a way to push you off. And oftentimes, there's no support system. Like you said, there's no 30, 60, 90 days, set up to really track goals. And it's a very, very common practice. And it is used. What is it used for? To prove that because it was one Black person, one Latina, or one woman, they don't belong here at this level. And that does not prove that. That is one person, right, that was failed by a system that did not support him, her, or they. And so it's very, very important to understand what is going on in your organization. And too often, they aren't assessing the process.
Right.
What's going on internally.
Internal accountability, right? And that's the thing with the outcomes-based hiring and the scorecards. And because then, 90 days in, if that person doesn't make it, as the HR business partner, I can talk to that manager and be like, what happened here? We had a scorecard that you signed off on. We had a candidate that met the requirements. Maybe it's a you thing and not a candidate thing. Like it gives us a little bit of a tool in our toolkit to make things objective rather than subjective. And that's what we need to be moving toward as an industry.
I love that, because after a while, you start monitoring your managers. Like, do you have the skill set to manage teams? Let's talk, what do you need to be successful as a manager? And not so much at the talent that is failing or being failed, as I often call it.
Yeah, and there's actually a great team out of Denver here called Interview IA, and they've actually built an interview platform that is taking bias out of the process and is actually allowing HR folks to see in our pipeline where are people falling off and actually having data. Because if it keeps landing at the same certain interviewer that's not getting a certain type of person through, now we have data and not just some like subjective feeling. And we're fallible human beings, right? And so if we can do whatever we can to like let use systems to help us sidestep our own bias that's just wired in, like use technology for good and not just for self gain. And I will say to my fellow recruiters out there, do not be bringing in diverse talent and talent of color just to interview and know that you're not going to hire them. Like, don't pat yourself on the back that you got 3 people interviews. Pat yourself on the back when people got hired, and really pat yourself on the back when people got promoted and retained, because I'm also seeing some of that performative crap, and you're wasting people's times. It is time and money to interview for jobs, and quit being performative about it. Like you're doing harm. Really mean it or don't bother. You know what I'm saying also as well. So I'm just hearing more talk about that when we're talking about people talking within their communities. Like, it's superficial. Stop doing it.
Absolutely. So what are some action steps that you would advise organizations to take to not fall into the diversity trap?
I think my favorite feedback is just, and suggestion is always the audit. You got to start looking internally, dude. Like any type of growth, for anyone that's ever done a personal journey of any type or professional growth, you know that it starts with doing an assessment of like, where am I? Is this where I want to be? Where do I want to be? And then what can I do to get where I want to go? And we do that as persons, right? Like as a recruiter, I need to do the work of recognizing bias and systemic oppression and realizing what's existing in order to do something different. But it's also true as organizations. Organizations are an organism too. And so as an organization, how do we look internally? Let's do an audit of your benefits. Then look at some of your competitors in the market or the companies out there that are like getting best place to work awards. What are their benefits? What are they offering that you're not offering, right? Start to just do an assessment. Like if you don't have good benefits, you're not going to have great employees. That's just a full stop. Start looking at your job descriptions. Do you have bias? Are you using, Kat Manfield has a gender decoder tool that you can use. There's also Textio, I think it is Textio, that will help you identify gendered terms in your job descriptions. Look at your website. What kind of photos are you using? What kind of words are you using? Are you using really hyper aggressive, cheesy words like ninja and rock star? Like, stop doing that. Stop trying to build everything for a 27-year-old white male cis het guy. That is what tech has been built for. And when you recognize that as we offer better benefits, as we offer a better work environment, as we offer more clear and accurate job descriptions, and so as our website starts to reflect more the inclusive culture that we are and we want to be, it will naturally bring the right talent to you. And it will help everything that you do downstream improve. And just for the record, when you design systems or you design processes or benefits for those that are most on the margins, those that are most overlooked, you build for them, or you build for accessibility, people that might need more things to help them do their job. As you build for the bigger picture, everybody benefits. Everyone will benefit from those new perks. Everyone will benefit for the improved office. It's not just the people that are pushed to the margins that will benefit, but like literally inherently the whole culture will be improved when you design and build and support for everyone. And so just start with looking at it in the mirror and then start putting the mirror to your organization. And then from there you can build, where do you want to go? And then how do we move in that direction? But we got to do the self-work first. Full stop.
Absolutely agree. We have a question. How is impact of people with ADA diversity organizations?
I'm not quite, I understand the question. What do you think, Michelle?
Well, I think a lot of organizations are lagging in being past the bare minimum when the ADA compliance. But when they look at diversity, a lot of organizations don't, for whatever reason, and I'll put it to you this way, if they're experienced with differently able, I prefer to use that, is they can't do the job or they're going to slow us down. It's a disadvantage to hire somebody who's differently able. The culture has to shift, and they need to understand, like Alison said, they have to build in opportunities to bring in talent. I remember I was at an event and the person was describing how they interviewed somebody who had epilepsy. And the particular person did really great on the interview. They were literally backing out of the space when they had an event occur. And so they had a car accident. They had flown in for the interview, so they weren't local. And so it was this big thing. And then the company, of course, said, that's why we don't hire people like that. And so it was even a bigger challenge than for HR and recruiting to bring in anybody that was differently able, as opposed to say, okay, we really like this talent. How do we self-educate? How do we make sure they have what they need within the organization to be successful? And that is, they did the exact 180 on it. And we don't have enough people at levels to really make things much simplified and really change the mindset. It's really interesting because we'll see older white men become hard of hearing. and they'll just end up, they'll like, oh, well, they'll just get a hearing aid. And sometimes younger people, I was one of those younger people, like, why is he having, we're on a call, like, oh, maybe he can't hear because it's a bad connection. And someone like, oh no, his hearing aid is battery's dead. Let me call somebody else to let him know we were all on. But we didn't know, and we didn't know how to, and nobody had educated us. There happened to be somebody else on the call who knew the executive that was leading the call. And so, how do you go about and educate on a regular basis to go through these things with your employees? And they don't do these things, right? They completely leave them out. And now you have older people who are 40 years in their career, still have a lot to offer organizations that are often sometimes just overlooked and pushed out because their hearing aid battery went dead during a call, literally. And so I think all of it has to change before we get to that point, but it's not fast enough. And there's so many negative connotations to it. And so I wish there was, I know there are some great people. We have a speaker coming on later in the series who works in invisible disabilities, and how does that, like when you see somebody that needs a ramp, that's one thing, but how do you know when you can't visibly see that somebody's differently able? So definitely a great topic. I just don't see a lot of organizations really starting from the beginning or really doing an assessment of what really needs to happen and how to accommodate incoming talent, and even sometimes internal talent. Go ahead, Alison.
Yeah. So speaking of that, we were just having this conversation internally last week. Also speaking with an expert in this space around when you design for the most marginalized. Again, everyone can benefit because mental health is also seen as a disability. You need some accommodations, but who's going to elect to let you know on the first day of the job or during the interview, right, that they might have ADHD or they have their own coping mechanisms? But if I, as the recruiter or the talent partner, as part of my onboarding process, right, I give everybody, not just the one that I saw with a cane or with a mobile assistance device. If I give everybody during their onboarding, here's your contract, here's your health benefits, and here's also the list of all the accommodations that we can make available to you. You give it to everybody, right? Whether it's a screen reader adaptation, whether it's a type of desk, whether it's a different kind of hardware, right, for people that might have some dexterity challenges, things like that, provide it to everybody and not wait for people to ask, right? It's some small things like that where it's just like, and I also just want to say to the audience as well, I can't remember the exact number, but it's something like over 50% of people that have, are disabled in some way. It was via an accident that happened when they were over 25 years old. So what we need as an organization, what we need as an industry is empathy. They are not an other, because guess what? It literally could be you. It could be your partner. You could have a car accident. MS comes on in the middle of your life. I live in Larimer County. It's one of the greatest concentrations of multiple sclerosis diagnosis. It primarily also hits women, like later stage. This could be you. This could be you. So like design as if it is you, right? Like have more empathy for a bigger tent, build a bigger tent so that if it is you, you've been doing the right thing and you know how to help and you know what is necessary. And even if it's not ever you or someone that you know, build for the better good and your company will reap the rewards. Because at the end of the day, the cost of an extra ramp or a standing desk or a desk that goes up and down to accommodate a wheelchair, whatever it is far cheaper than it is to go and find someone new and lose lose the talent that you had or have natural attrition in your organization because they see you're not progressive, you're not inclusive, that you're actually alienating people. Talent is discerning. Millennials and Gen and Zoomers will not work for you. They will not work for you if you have a toxic culture, if you have an uninclusive culture. And it's not about, 100% it's about humanity, as Toranella says, but it's also fundamental business. If you want to have an organization, you need to build one where people want to work. They will not work for you if you are toxic or unaccommodating. Full stop.
Absolutely agree. Thank you for that, Alison.
I love talking about this. It's just like, come on, we as an industry, it's literally our responsibility to be the drivers of equity and inclusion through everything that we do as recruiters and talent professionals. Full stop.
Absolutely. Where can people connect with you?
Oh, yes. Well, I'm all over LinkedIn. I mean, that's my one social channel anymore. Alison Daley, Daley. Please also follow our organization, Recruiting Innovation. If you're interested in any sort of tech training, tech recruiter certification, we offer that. If you are an underrepresented talent curious about becoming a certified tech recruiter, check out our Recruiting Innovation website, click on the grant tab and learn all about the Ernestine McClendon Talent Grant and apply. And we'd love to have you in our program to become a certified tech recruiter.
Thank you, Alison, for joining me today. Everybody, I hope this has helped give you some action items and some clarity of how you can avoid the diversity hire trap. I will be back later on with another edition of the Equity Pursuit. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Michelle.
You're welcome. Glad you could join.